Good morning, and again, I'm going to provide a supplementary video for our discussion for today. Now, starting on slide 14, this is again the first part where you're going to read, again, linguistics and the components of language. Assuming that you have already seen the diagram on the right side from the orientation video, so this time, this diagram will serve as our guide in understanding the components of language together with how they are used and when they are used. So, linguistics is defined as the study of language systems. In the course of your journey here in the AP English language, you will get to know further the different components of language as separate courses, which you're also going to take later on. So its components are arbitrary divisions in linguistic investigation. They are interrelated with each other in some ways, but we study them separately. So you might ask what the meaning of arbitrary is. Let's now proceed to the next slide. In linguistics and the components of language, we can say that arbitrariness or arbitrary is a description or it shows the absence of any natural or necessary connection between a word's meaning and its sound or form. If from before we had discussed and tackled a sample for sound symbolism, remember Gratacs and Lamonians, this time this discussion will serve as an antithesis to what we have been discussing before. Because this time, clearly to say there is really no actual connection between what you say in a particular meaning and its sound or form. Let's hear it for an example. Now, of course, I would be saying this word knjiga, which probably some of you might already be using the Google search, or probably just leave it be. However, if I say the word book, assuming that will probably ring a bell into you because you know what a book is, right? It's in English. And again, your description will go on and forth, right? It's already in your mind. I won't be giving any meaning for this one, but you know exactly what a book means. Now, if we're to look further into the two words, actually, the knjiga there is the Serbian translation for the English word book. So if I were to say, okay, knjiga, and one of you would say book. Well, of course, you know already that they would refer both to books. But let's say I'm referring to a book that I have here right now with me, and you're referring to a Niga, which you also have there. So both of these might probably be books, but they have different content. They have different genres, right? Probably on what you're reading right now would be on inspiration, while I'm reading something related to entertainment. So again, they're both books, right? They're probably interrelated as book, but again, they're discussed differently because they have different genres. So in the same way, with language and its components, we have arbitrary divisions. They might be interrelated, but again, they are discussed separately. And so let's go to the first component, which is phonology. So from the Greek word phone, meaning sound or voice, it is the study of speech sounds of a particular language. You might have seen this diagram before when you were researching about linguistics or probably language, and you might see some symbols where it's not that familiar with us, but you can also see the vowels that we are using, right? Now let's try to compare the vowels that we use in Filipino and the vowels that we use in English. Of course, in English, we will be saying it as A, E, I, O, U, as compared to the Filipino version, which is A, E, I, O, U, right? That means to say that vowels alone can have different sounds and at the same time, different ways on how to articulate it. And with the differences of articulation, this is where the vowel tree, so to speak, or the so-called vowel triangle will now appear into our aid. Again, to know how vowels are articulated in some languages, right? So one language may or probably may not contain the vowels that we have here. All the vowels, well, that's great. But again, for some languages, just like the Filipino language, we probably would not have all of the vowels here, right? Now, next. So a subdivision of phonology class is phonetics, the study of the speech sounds of human language in general, either from the perspective of their production, which is articulatory phonetics, their perception, which is auditory phonetics, or their physical properties, the so-called acoustic phonetics. So to differentiate the three class, first of all, the perspective is how we see it as being created, right? We see and observe how the sound is being created. Number two would be the auditory phonetics as to how we hear it. Let's say a certain word is being spoken, and hearing unto its letters, of course, they will have different sounds. And of course, their physical properties, we now look into how it is being created and how its dynamics or how soft or loud it is created. There might be some instances where it's created or the sound is created so loud and some would be so soft. All right. Now, sir, what is the difference between phonetics and phonology itself? Well, one answer that we can have here is that phonetics is how your consonants are or vowels and others are articulated. So we know and we will discover how A can also be pronounced as A, can also be pronounced as and other more. Right? We have different sounds of the A variation. In the same way, there's also now what we call as phonology, wherein this time we will now know how to use them in speech. So in this case, we will also learn the different tones that we can create in order to say or to express, let's say, emotion, anger, or probably sadness, and a lot more. So again, they all lie in the surface of phonology. Now, if you will observe in the Philippine languages that we have, the sound of R in us, which is the trill sound R, right? You would probably hear it in that way, right? And in English, we have the much softer version of R, which is the R sound, okay? So that again could be one point that we can look for, all right? So you can also look for other examples of words in the Philippine language that uses the letter R and try to observe by pronouncing it as compared to English words with its R. All right. So the International Phonetic Alphabet, which we'll also be learning later on, are a set of symbols or characters, even alphabets that we are going to learn further as to how words would be so-called transcribed in order to read them properly. Right. Next would be morphology. So the next component from the Greek word morphe, which is form, is the study of structure or form of words in a particular language and of their classification. This time, class, we'll get to learn further how words are usually constructed. So there are words which we say that they're so long, but it turns out it's just a combination of two or more words, right? And others would be the so-called morphemes or blocks of letters, which we add further to make new meanings, just like the word repayment, right? Well, we know already that the word re is a prefix which means repeat, and of course, on the suffix again, which now make the word into a noun, again, is part of morphology. Now, there are some principles of word formation where we need now to look further. The first one, how sounds combine into meaningful units, such as prefixes, suffixes, and roots, or as in the sample reminder. All right. So the word reminder there again is actually a combination of clusters of letters. Next, which of these units are distinctive and which are predictable variants, such as the different forms of the indefinite article a and an, right? So we will also learn further as to why these articles are used in this manner. By the way, we'll also get to learn further why the articles a and an correspond to either a consonant or a vowel. And finally, what processes of word formation a language characteristically uses, such as compounding, or basically what I said earlier, a combination of words. Okay? So those are the principles of word formation. Moving forward, we now have syntax. So the third component now of language would tell you from the Greek word syntasein, which is to put in order. It is the study of the order and arrangement of words into larger units, or the so-called sentences, as well as the relationships holding between elements in these hierarchical units, or more simply, the structure of sentences and its types. Now, again, we were now talking of hierarchy, and again, to arrange them hierarchically, this is again by looking on its category as a word. Of course, we know what a noun is, we know what a verb is, but what makes them into a noun is also what we need to discover in syntax so that we will know where to properly place it. Okay, the third one, which is semantics, from the Greek word semainein, which is to signify, show, or signal, is the study of how meaning is conveyed in words, phrases, or clauses. The best way for us to do semantics is, of course, to look into a dictionary. When we look for meaning in a dictionary of a certain word, then of course, that again is a sample of how semantics works. We create and look for meaning of a certain word, phrase, or even clause. But still, it's not just left to having one meaning for word or phrase or even a cluster. And so this is where pragmatics takes its lead. So from the Greek word pragma, which means deed or affair, and from prasein, which is to do, is the study of the functions of language and its use in context. There is a very famous line that would say you need to read between the lines. That majorly applies to pragmatics itself because it doesn't mean that you see an object means just only one thing. It can have different interpretations depending on what context you belong in. Let's say, for example, you would say it's hot, but you're not really sure whether you're saying it if it's hot because of the weather or it's hot because you touched something. So the context there needs to be identified. And another thing would be the sample of a picture here of a set of traffic lights where others would say the light is red or the light is green. Well, of course, these colors are just ordinary colors, but again, we also see red and green lights even in factories, right? So again, we also now need to see on what context is the red and green lights placed in. And so that again is pragmatics. We learn further how the words are used in context. And this is now one final question that I'll be leaving for everybody. How can you describe the order of the components of language? Now that you've learned the five basic components of it, so how do you think they were arranged? All right. So those are the things that I want you now to look further as part of your self-reflection of this topic. And again, I'm giving you now this supplementary video as a guide for the slide presentation I presented. So may you all have a great day.